Daniel Reyes didn't say a word as he opened his desk drawer for the last time. Nobody in the office kept typing. Everyone had already stopped, watching him fold a small photograph and slide it into his jacket pocket, before reaching for the empty cardboard box he'd brought from the supply closet. Across the floor, his manager Richard Voss stood with his arms crossed. "Either you follow the policy or you walk out that door." Daniel simply nodded. "Then I guess that's my answer." Daniel had spent almost 9 years at Palmetto Freight Solutions, a mid-sized shipping coordination firm on the edge of Charlotte, North Carolina. It wasn't the kind of job people talked about at parties, but it was the kind of job that kept the world moving. Every late truck, every missing pallet, every angry customer eventually ended up on his desk, and somehow he always found a way through it. His coworkers used to joke that Daniel could untangle a logistics nightmare with a legal pad and a gas station coffee. He laughed along, but the truth was heavier than the joke. 4 years earlier, his wife Elena had died suddenly after a short illness that gave the family almost no time to prepare. Since then, his whole world had rearranged itself around his 7-year-old son, Mateo. Mornings started at 5 a.m. Lunches packed, shoes tied twice because Mateo insisted on double knots, a 15-minute drive to Ashford Elementary before the 25-minute commute to work. Daniel was never late, not once. His downstairs neighbor, an older woman named Ruth, watched Mateo for an hour after school each day until Daniel got home. He tried to pay her properly. She always tried to give the money back. "You already fix my porch light every time it goes out," she'd say. "You already give my kid cookies he doesn't need," he'd answer. Life wasn't easy, but it worked. Until the company brought in a new regional director. The old director had retired after almost 25 years, and everyone expected another steady, practical replacement. Instead, corporate sent Richard Voss, 39 years old, sharp suits, a stack of efficiency slogans, and a firm belief that any problem could be solved by simply asking people to work more. Within a month, flexible hours were gone, remote work was cancelled, family accommodations quietly disappeared from the employee handbook. "Reliability is the whole job," Richard liked to say in meetings. To Daniel, it sounded more like, "Your life outside these walls isn't my concern." At first, Daniel adjusted. He rearranged childcare, skipped lunch breaks, answered emails after Mateo had gone to sleep, sometimes even while sitting beside him at the dinner table. One night Mateo tapped his arm. "Dad?" "Yeah, bud. Are you even listening?" Daniel looked up. Mateo hadn't asked because he needed an answer. He'd asked because he already knew what it would be. A string of storms hit Charlotte that spring. Roads flooded, school pickup times shifted without warning, and shipping schedules fell apart across the board. Everyone at Palmetto was stretched thin, Daniel included. Then Ruth called. "I hate to even ask, sweetheart," she said, "but my knee's acting up again. I don't think I can watch Mateo tomorrow." Daniel spent his lunch break calling every after-school program within 20 miles. Nothing available on such short notice. That evening he emailed HR, asking for permission to leave 2 hours early the next day and make up the time over the weekend. No response. The next afternoon at 2:15 HR finally replied, "Request denied, not covered under current policy." Daniel went upstairs to talk to Richard directly. Richard didn't look up from his monitor. "We all have things going on at home. I get it. Then handle it without expecting the company to bend the rules for you. My son doesn't have anyone to pick him up today, so hire a sitter. I can't afford emergency childcare every time something falls through." Richard finally met his eyes. "That's not really our problem, is it?" The office had gone completely silent. Daniel chose his next words carefully. "I've never once asked for special treatment. I've covered weekend shifts. I've worked every holiday you've needed me to. I haven't taken a single sick day in almost 4 years. Richard leaned back in his chair. "Maybe you're overdue for one then." The comment landed harder than either of them expected. Daniel stood there a moment longer. "I only need 2 hours. No. Then I don't know what else you want from me." Richard shrugged. "Do your job the way it's written, or don't do it here." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He walked back to his desk and began clearing it out. A chipped mug Mateo had painted at a birthday party. A small wooden toy truck that was supposedly good luck. The photograph of Elena he kept tucked behind his monitor. His closest coworker, a woman named Simone Ortiz, came over quietly. "You don't have to do this." He gave her a tired smile. "I think I do. You'll find something else." "I hope so." "What about health insurance?" He looked down at the photo in his hand. "I'll figure it out." He carried the box past rows of cubicles. No speeches, no slammed doors, just the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway. Outside rain was falling steadily. Daniel sat in his old truck for 1 full minute before starting the engine, then drove straight to Ashford Elementary. Mateo was waiting on the front steps, backpack hugged to his chest. His face lit up the second he spotted the truck. "I knew you'd come. I'll always come, bud." Mateo climbed in and noticed the box on the passenger seat right away. "Dad, what's that?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road. I think this week's going to look a little different. Mateo didn't ask anything else. He just reached over and took his father's hand. That night they ate boxed spaghetti at the kitchen table under a calendar still stuck on last month. The TV stayed off. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Are you going back to work Monday? Mateo finally asked. I don't think. Did you get fired? Daniel smiled faintly. No, I left. Mateo nodded like that answered everything. Then he pulled a crumpled drawing from his backpack. The two of them holding hands outside a house, a giant sun overhead and at the bottom in wobbly handwriting. Dad always comes. Daniel folded it carefully and tucked it into his wallet. This one's coming with me. Weeks of quiet job hunting followed, some interviews, mostly silence. One recruiter admitted flat out that the role needed someone without scheduling limitations. Daniel thanked her anyway and hung up, staring out the window longer than he meant to. For the first time since leaving Palmetto, he wondered if Richard had been right after all. Then he found something smaller, a coordinator role at a local nonprofit that delivered surplus food to community shelters. The pay was modest, the office was cramped. The coffee was worse than at his old job. But on his first morning, the program director, a woman named Carla Whitfield, shook his hand and said something he hadn't heard in years. We're really glad you're here. She meant it. When Daniel explained he needed 20 minutes each afternoon to pick up Mateo and would finish his workload from home, Carla didn't reach for a manual. She just asked, can you still hit your deadlines every time? Then we're good. The conversation lasted under a minute. It felt like something he hadn't experienced in years. Mateo started spending afternoons in a corner of the nonprofit's office, coloring at a spare desk, learning to water the plants from the front desk volunteer. Delivery drivers started greeting him by name. Someone even taped a handwritten sign to the breakroom fridge. Mateo's juice box. Please don't touch. Back at Palmetto, the cracks started small. Deliveries slipped. Longtime clients who used to ask for Daniel by name were now bounced between 3 different coordinators, each repeating the same apologies. Simone found herself digging through Daniel's old notebooks. Pages of handwritten shortcuts and warnings no spreadsheet had ever captured. One sticky note read, call the Ferris Bakery account before assuming they're late. They change their pickup times every other Friday. Another, truck 9 runs hot on the mountain route, add 20 minutes. None of it was official procedure. It was just years of paying attention. Richard blamed the team for a lack of urgency. People worked longer hours. Mistakes kept happening. 3 experienced coordinators quit within a month, and new hires didn't last long behind them. One rainy afternoon, Richard stood beside Daniel's empty desk. You worked with him longer than anyone, he said to Simone. Why didn't anyone tell me how much he actually held together? He probably figured his work spoke for itself. Richard looked around the half-empty floor. For the first time, people weren't avoiding his eyes out of fear, they were just too worn down to bother. A major client eventually requested a meeting, not about pricing, but about service. Deliveries that used to run flawlessly were now late every other week. Calls went unreturned for days. We're not angry, the client's representative said calmly. We're disappointed. Richard sat alone in the conference room long after she left, thinking about the afternoon Daniel had asked him for 2 hours. Not a raise, not a promotion. 2 hours to pick up his kid. Somehow at the time that had felt like an unreasonable demand. A few days later, driving past a community warehouse on the way to another appointment, Richard spotted Daniel's old truck parked outside. He almost kept driving. Instead he pulled in. Inside, Dan was helping unload crates, laughing at something an older volunteer had said. He looked different, lighter, not more successful on paper, just lighter. When Daniel noticed him, he wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over. Neither man spoke right away. I owe you an apology, Richard finally said. I thought treating everyone identically was the same as treating them fairly. It isn't, I understand that now. Rain tapped against the metal roof. Richard glanced around the warehouse. I also wanted to ask, would you consider coming back? Daniel smiled, polite but certain. I appreciate you asking. But I already have what I was looking for. Richard's eyes drifted to Mateo, sitting nearby drawing at a folding table. The boy waved. Richard waved back and understood, finally, what Daniel had actually been protecting. It was never about convenience. It was about time. What should I have done differently? Richard asked before leaving. Daniel thought for a moment. You could have asked one more question before giving one more order. There wasn't much left to say. They shook hands and walked away. No dramatic music, no audience, just 2 people who understood a little more than they had an hour earlier. Months later, Palmetto Freight Solutions quietly introduced flexible scheduling for employees with caregiving responsibilities. Managers went through new training on handling requests with patience instead of automatic refusals. The policy was never named after Daniel. Most employees never knew why it changed. That was fine. Some people don't need credit to leave something better behind them. At the nonprofit, Daniel found something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: peace. The paycheck covered the bills. The work meant something, and every single afternoon, without rushing and without apologizing to anyone, he picked Mateo up himself. On Fridays they stopped for ice cream on the way home. Nothing fancy, just their thing. One evening, halfway through a chocolate cone, Mateo looked up. "I'm glad you quit," Daniel laughed. "Yeah. Me too." He'd come to understand that success was never really about holding on to the biggest title. Sometimes it was simply about refusing to lose the people who were waiting for you at the end of the day.